The first thing I heard was the roar underground, like the earth was choking, and then my well exploded, spraying mud across my porch. Hank Rourke, the HOA president, stood at the fence watching, no shame in his smirk. I knew in that instant something was horribly wrong. I grabbed my boots and ran to the old ridge path behind my ranch, the one no outsider ever walked. Fresh tire tracks cut straight through my land. They hadn't just trespassed. They'd carved a trench big enough to swallow a pickup. Pipes, steel, fresh-welded seams. The HOA had built a water pipeline through my property without asking. Without a notice, without a word. My heart hammered as I walked the length of it, hearing the hum of pressurized flow. It wasn't just hooked in, it was active. They were already stealing my groundwater to feed their new luxury development. The Ridgeview Estates, a glittering cluster of mansions, whose owners demanded spotless lawns and endless fountains. I felt heat crawl up my neck. The HOA thought I'd just roll over. Not a chance. That night I confronted Hank at the clubhouse. He leaned back in his leather chair, eyes half-lidded like he'd already won. "It's legal enough," he said. "Eminent domain by necessity." I laughed in his face. "This isn't a government. It's a homeowners association." Hank tapped a folder. "Water rights are murky, Rourke, but your well sits on the only viable source for 3 miles. Ridgeview paid good money for access." My fists clenched. But then he added something that sent cold needles through my spine. "If you fight us, accidents happen out here." I left with my jaw tight and my mind racing. They dug their lifeline through my ranch. That meant one thing. I knew exactly where their source line connected to mine. And I knew something they didn't. I owned the aquifer's head, the hidden spring tucked deep in my northern acreage. If they wanted my water, they'd built their future on a single point of failure. I drove there before dawn, wind cutting through the pines. The spring whispered beneath the stones. I stood over it and made a decision that would change everything. I was going to buy the entire source outright from the county before the HOA even realized it was an independent parcel. Subscribe to Behind the Hedges for more HOA stories. But as I hiked back toward my truck, I saw movement near the ridge, flashlights, voices. The HOA wasn't waiting. They were already searching for the spring. Someone had told them. Someone close. My stomach dropped as one voice rose above the others. "Find the inlet! If he controls the source, we're done." And then I saw a silhouette. I recognized someone who should never have been there. Someone who knew my land better than anyone. My steps froze as the figure lifted a map, and pointed toward the crevice that concealed the spring's mouth. If they reached it before me, the HOA would control everything. And the figure turned, revealing a face I never thought I'd see there. Immediate. I froze when the flashlight beam slid across the canyon wall and lit up my younger brother, Luke. He shouldn't have been anywhere near that search party. Yet there he was, holding my topo map like he owned the land. I ducked behind a fallen pine, heart rattling so hard I felt it in my teeth. Luke had left the ranch years ago, claiming he wanted nothing to do with my dust cattle and stubborn pride. But now he was standing with Hank's crew, guiding them straight toward the inlet that fed the spring. I eased backward, boots silent on the needles. If Hank knew the spring's true location, he wouldn't just use it, he'd claim it. Bury it, control it forever, and the HOA would win. I needed to beat them to the county office by morning or lose every drop beneath my land. I made it to my truck by crawling under brush until the voices faded. The engine coughed awake, headlights off, rolling downhill in neutral until I hit the gravel road. Only when I was miles away did I turn the ignition fully. My knuckles were white on the wheel. Why would Luke betray me? Money? Old grudges? Or did Hank threaten him? I didn't have answers. Only the memory of Luke's face lit by that flashlight, tight. Guilty, maybe even scared. I tore down the highway toward the county registrar, praying the night clerk was still on shift. The building sat alone under buzzing lights. Inside, the clerk Marla rubbed her eyes and looked up. "Rourke? What now?" I slid the parcel number onto her counter. "I need the mineral and water rights. Transferred to my name tonight, now, before anyone else files." Her brows shot up. "Someone called about that parcel an hour ago, asked if it was open." My stomach twisted. "Did they file?" "Not yet," she whispered. "Said they were sending someone first thing in the morning." I leaned in. Then file mine tonight, please. If they get those rights, they'll destroy my ranch. Marla hesitated, only a second before stamping the papers. The weight lifted off my chest, but only halfway. The HOA wouldn't accept defeat. Not Hank, not with millions poured into Ridgeview Estates. I hurried outside when I heard a vehicle engine growl in the distance. Headlights swept across the empty lot. A black SUV slowed, then stopped. A door slammed. A voice echoed, "He already filed." "Hank's not gonna like this." Panic surged. I sprinted to my truck, fumbling my keys, when a second voice cut through the darkness, low and trembling, Luke's. "Rourke, don't run. We need to talk. You don't understand what's happening." I turned slowly, hands shaking as he stepped into the glow, eyes wide with something far worse than guilt, fear. Then he said, "They're not here to negotiate. They're here to take you. Subscribe to Behind the Hedges for more HOA stories." Luke's warning hung in the air as shadows poured from the SUV and someone raised a stun baton, advancing toward me through the dark. The stun baton crackled as the men closed in, their boots scraping across the asphalt. I stepped back, fists clenched, but Luke suddenly moved in front of me, arms raised. "You touch him, Hank loses everything," he barked. The men hesitated, glancing at each other. The baton's hum faded. I stared at Luke, confused and furious. "Why are you with them?" He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes locked on the men. "Because Hank said if I didn't help him find the spring, he'd condemn my place. He said he'd prove I built illegally on setback lines. He had paperwork, signatures, even a judge in his pocket. I didn't have a choice." My pulse hammered. Hank's reach was deeper than I thought. The men stepped back toward the SUV, clearly unsure now that Luke had flipped his stance. One growled, "Hank said both of you come quietly, or he shuts down the whole ridge and blames you." Luke swallowed hard. "Tell him we'll handle this ourselves." The men glared, but retreated to their vehicle, tires screeching as they sped off. I grabbed Luke's arm. "We're running. Now." We jumped into my truck and tore down the road, gravel spraying behind us. Dawn crept over the hills as we raced back toward the ranch. Luke kept glancing out the window like he expected the SUV to reappear any second. "He's going to the spring," Luke finally said. "He knows owning the rights isn't enough if he controls the access point. He'll reroute it, bury it, make your deed worthless." The thought sent ice through my veins. If Hank destroyed the inlet, every gallon beneath my ranch would drain into Ridgeview's pipes. My land would dry to dust. We turned onto the ridge trail, bumping over rocks until the truck couldn't climb any farther. We ran the rest on foot. When we crested the final rise, I stopped dead. The spring clearing was swarming with HOA. Contractors, excavators, drills, floodlights. Hank stood at the edge of the inlet, barking orders, his suit jacket flapping in the cold wind. "Shut it off and redirect the intake line. I want this entire source under HOA management by noon." Rage roared inside me. I marched straight down the slope before Luke could stop me. Hank turned, his smirk wide and poisonous. "You're too late. Paperwork doesn't matter if the water flows our way." I stepped closer. "You built your empire on stolen land and stolen water." "Correction," Hank said softly, nodding to the machines. "I built it on initiative." The excavator bucket swung toward the inlet. Luke shouted, "Rourke, move!" But I didn't. I looked at the inlet, then at Hank, and made a decision that would end this fight forever. I lunged toward the master valve built into the temporary junction the contractors had installed, grabbing the wheel with both hands. Hank yelled, "Stop!" I twisted. The valve snapped hard. A thunderous shift rolled beneath the ground. Water pressure screamed through the pipes, reversing the flow. Floodwater burst upward in a violent plume, knocking men sideways. The excavator toppled, mud swallowing its treads. The pipeline feeding Ridgeview exploded down the valley like a ruptured vein, spraying arcs of water into the sky. Hank stumbled, soaked, his face drained of victory. Luke pulled me back as the clearing trembled, the spring erupting with raw, uncontrolled force. Hank stared at me, trembling with rage and fear. "You've destroyed everything," he croaked. I stepped toward him. "No, I reclaimed what was mine." The machines hissed. The pipeline groaned, and Hank finally understood the truth. The HOA had built its kingdom on a source it never truly owned, one I would never again let them touch.